What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the Gravity Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris. Thank you for choosing to tune in today. Hey, folks, I'm excited about this continued conversation. How do we identify our foundations in life? How do we sort through all the noise and chaos and make sure that we don't get carried away? How do we stay grounded? Today's guest, folks, is Danny Coon. Danny is a 30-year veteran, retired law enforcement officer from Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. In an agency like that, you just gain perspective. You gain perspective about what it's like to be a first responder. And what I love about Danny is that he has a heart for first responders, and he's doing a lot of work currently trying to support first responders as they go through their career. So I'm excited for you to hear Danny's perspectives. But before we do that, folks, I wanted to talk about an organization, 484 Hero. About this time last year, Jaimie and I were talking about 484 Hero. 484 Hero is an organization that's raising money to support law enforcement officers around our country. Their event that's coming up is on January 8th, and the title of the event is Coffee with Dan. There's two purposes of the event. First, my friend Daniel McCartney was a sheriff's deputy in Pierce County, Washington. He was murdered on January 8th, and the event is to remember him and also to say thank you to the law enforcement officers around our country. Daniel's widow, Sierra, who Jaimie and I are friends with, she was touched. She was moved by the support that she had from the law enforcement community after her husband died. And it moved her to initially just start supporting law enforcement officers herself at a coffee stand. And all of a sudden, this initiative, this effort grew some legs. And Sierra was surrounded by some of her family members, including her brother, that have moved that small effort, that small thank you, to really trying to spread it around our country. So we're excited to see that event happen this year, for us to say thank you to law enforcement. If you know a coffee shop, or if you are a coffee shop owner or manager and you're willing to get on board, there's a link down in the notes. Maybe you don't own a coffee shop, but you want to still say thank you to law enforcement, and this is a way that you can do it. You can also get on 484 Heroes website, and you can donate so that coffee is going to be given free to police officers that day, and they're going to feel that love and feel that gratitude. With that, folks, let's get into this interview with Danny Coon. Danny Coon, welcome to the Gravity Podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today talking with you. Got some pretty important subject I want to talk about, and hopefully we can save some lives with it.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this. You and I don't know each other, but the emails we exchanged and then taking a look at your website, I think you're going to have a lot of great things to share with our first responder listeners. Hey, if you don't mind, for folks that don't know you, Danny, can you just introduce yourself?
Certainly. 10 years ago, I retired after a 31-year career in law enforcement. Retired as a sergeant from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, and had a great career. After I retired, somewhere around 2018, I learned that there were more law enforcement suicides than there were law enforcement landed deaths, and that shook my core. And so I started getting into it, and I started blogging. And just at first, I was just writing little quick one-page blogs on Facebook, and that morphed into my website, which is bulletprooffirstresponder.com. It's all one word. And it morphed into that, and I've been blogging. I try to get a blog out every month on different issues facing first responders. And the main thing still is the suicide rate among first responders. This year so far, and we're 320 days into the year this year, right now, today, there have been 170 first responder suicides. That's basically one suicide every 45 hours. And on top of that, just in the law enforcement field, there have been 89 law enforcement suicides. That's one every 3.5 days. So it is a problem. Thank God the numbers are coming down. So over the last several years, there's been several people in this arena. We've been getting the message and pushing the message. If you need help, get help. And as long as we continue to do that and bring the numbers down, because one first responder suicide is one too many. And if we can continue to get that down. But when we look into suicides, the suicide rate just among law enforcement, last year there was 162 law enforcement suicides. That's one, I want to say every 45 hours, something like that. And then on top of that, out of the 162 law enforcement suicides, 74 cops died in the line of duty. And that was not died by violence in the line of duty. There we go. And 60 of those were gunshot wounds. So those are pretty alarming numbers when the suicide rate last year was twice as many as the death by violence rate.
That's something heavy to sit there and process. The idea that it's more dangerous to be in our own skin than it is to check into service and go out and police our community.
That's correct. It's scary. And when you look at it, the World Health Organization, they estimate there are 800,000 suicides worldwide. That's one suicide every, I think they said 45 seconds. And I did the math. And it's just, it doesn't sound right, but that is every 45 seconds, someone in the world is dying by suicide.
Wow.
And it's really sad. In 2019, 47,511 people died by suicide just in the United States. That was the 10th leading cause of death. In the same year, homicide was the 16th leading cause of death. So, suicides are outnumbering homicides, and that's also just unfathomable numbers, and it's just crazy. But when we look into it, for me, a lot of it is just education and training. People don't know the cops, the firefighters, they hear about it, every once in a while, but they just don't know the extent of the issue and the problems. And when I became a cop, all I wanted to do was drive fast and take bad guys to jail.
Yes, let's talk about that. No, keep going.
And that was fun. Everybody likes to do that. That's what cops do. And unfortunately, there's a lot of baggage that goes with that. There's stuff that the constant 911 calls and the constant dead baby calls, the constant just the violence itself. Our bodies and our brains weren't built to handle and to accept the violence that we see every day. And that's and it's just, and I came from a department of 10,000 deputies.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's large. There's only in California, there's only a handful of departments that are up in those numbers. It's the Sheriff's Department, Los Angeles Police Department, California Highway Patrol. Most departments in the United States are only somewhere between 5 and 50 members.
Yeah.
And they don't see the amount of violence that I saw, but they still process it the same. You can see one thing 100 times, or you can see it one time. It doesn't matter. It's still processed through your brain the same. And it just sticks up in there and it never goes away. And that's what's causing problems for our guys. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know how to talk to anybody about it. And a good example is back in the mid 80s. I'd been a deputy for, I think, 7 or 8 years. As a training officer, I was working the graveyard shift, and I had transitioned. The graveyard shift is about midnight to 8 in the morning, something like that. And I transitioned to the swing shift to be a training officer. And one of the guys on that shift, now we were, I wouldn't say friends, we were acquaintances. We worked the same station. We had, our whole time we've been working opposite shifts and everything. And we're getting off at the same time. And one night he just goes, "Hey, Danny, can I talk to you?" And sure, why not? I don't have anything else to do. It's midnight. And so we sat down in his car and we talked for about an hour. And he was telling me about, and this is a guy, like I said, we were acquaintances. We worked different shifts for most of our time together. Yeah. And he's telling me about how he's having a hard time with his marriage, his problems he's having at work, processing stuff, and just what we're talking about today. And for him, that worked out real good because we talked for a while, and all he wanted to do was have someone listen. And
Yeah.
it was good for for me to listen to him. And I understood a lot, and I didn't have much to add to the conversation. And I got your back, brother. And, but that's all we really need to do. And that's what our cops and our firefighters need to do is they need to sit down and talk to people about it.
That is so powerful because here's the thing. I love peer support. I've been a trained peer support group counselor for 15 years. But you don't have to have peer support training to help your peers, whether you're a dispatcher, a firefighter, EMS, law enforcement, military. If you just listen, now in listening, you might need to push them towards different resources, right? That we're going to get to here in a little bit of some of the great resources that are out there for first responders. Um, but just listening and looking the other person in the eye and being like, I get it, brother. I get it, sister. I struggle with those kind of calls sometimes too. That there's power in that, because what I found in my own struggle with PTSD is that I struggle in silence. That's where it's dark. That's where I'm all alone. That's where I shame myself for not being a good cop, a good dad, a good husband. The list goes on. However, when I talk to someone else who I respect and they just listen and say, Chris, I get it. It's tough sometimes. Like right off the bat, I no longer feel alone. What have you seen, Danny, in your career? I mean, obviously there's that experience, but that's difficult. That guy mustered up some courage to share that with you.
Yeah, he did.
So
That's what's amazing is, I became, and I probably like you, I became an expert at suppression, at just burying everything so deep inside me. Compartmentalization is what I call it.
yeah,
I'm a professional at it. And only until about 5 or 6 years ago did some of these feelings that I had when I was working starting to come out. So I've been retired for 5 years, and they're just now starting to come out. As I talk about it, as I write about it, that's my release. Is I'll sit there and write a blog or be on a podcast and talk about PTSD or PTSI, I call it in general. And that's just relieving a lot of the stress in me. And this peer support has been a great asset. Anybody that has any problems, talk to someone. There's in 2017, and I think this survey went through 2019, the University of Phoenix did a survey among first responders. And they found that 57% of the first responders in their survey feared repercussions from admitting that they had suicidal ideation, or they were depressed, or they had some type of mental illness. Out of that, on top of that, 40% thought they would either be demoted or terminated. And I have listened to other podcasts, and I've talked to people that know others who have been terminated because they had a PTSI
diagnosis.
There we go, diagnosis. You know, in some agencies, especially for cops, there's one thing that all cops like is we have that coveted concealed weapons permit. Now in California, it's really big because they don't get them; they're hard to come by. And for someone in California to sit there and say, "Hey, I have a PTSI problem. I'm stressed out," and it's very easy for your employer to take away your concealed weapons permit, to take away your weapon, period. And once they do that, they not only exasperated the problem, but they just pushing you towards failure, and that's or pushing you towards termination, everything. And that's what the guys don't want.
Let me ask a question there, Danny, because when I've had 2 times back in 2010 when I was a child crime detective that I went to my doc and said, "Hey, I'm struggling and I need help." And then it happened again this last summer in June. And both times my doctors wrote me notes saying that I was under their care for a medical condition and that I was not fit for duty for 30 days. My employer had no clue what I had going on, and it's none of their business, honestly. I have a doctor giving me a note saying I'm under their care. And so I don't know if it's different in different states, but I like talking about some of this stuff because even in Washington State, where that's the law, my boss it's none of their business what I have going on medical condition wise. I have a doctor saying I'm not fit for duty. They can't make me work. I'm on FMLA at this point, Family Medical Leave Act.
Right.
So is it different in other states, or is there maybe just, is that one of those things that we're not talking about, to where, hey, folks, if you're not okay and you're afraid that your employer is going to do all these things, it's none of their business what you have going on. It's, you get a doctor's note, you give that to your employer, and then you work with your medical team to heal either your brain, in my case, or maybe your body if you have some kind of physical injury.
It's kind of a slippery slope. Before I retired, okay, there's a lot of large departments and moderate sized departments. They'll either have their own psychological services unit, or they'll have someone that they contract with. And up until probably 8 years ago, if the employee was sent to a doctor or a psychologist by the agency, then the agency had a right to know what the medical issues were. And in California, like Washington, that changed several years ago to now the department, unless there's something serious, like you're going to go commit suicide as soon as you leave the office, the department doesn't need to know your information or what's going on with you, which is great. But some of the problems that I see is, one, people that our first responders don't know that. They're afraid that the department's going to find out anyway. But what I see that's worse than that, there's a lot of agencies that have their own psychological services. The psychiatrists that are coming in, they're still in the training period. They're in that 3,000 hour period where they just need to build up clientele so they can go out on their own, and they don't stick around that long. You're looking at someone who maybe 3 or 4 years as a police psychologist, and then they go on in the private practice, and they're not really interested, or they're not really pushing towards your problems. They're pushing towards getting themselves out of the business or into the private practice, and that's sad.
Yeah, this is what I would want to say. First and foremost, everyone listening needs to know I am not an expert. I can speak from my experience of what my process has been in Washington state. So you need to get curious and figure out what the process is in your state. I would say this: every single police officer should have 3 things. They should have a lawyer that they know they would hire. They should have a doctor that they see at least once a year getting their blood work done. And they should have a mental health professional that they see at least once a year. And I would actually advocate for once a month, just to sit there and help you unpack stuff. Here's the thing: if you have your own medical team whose only job in this world is to take care of you, they're not there to represent the organization. They're there to help you heal. Then you can build these relationships of trust with those folks, and they're going to do what's best for you, best for your health, best for your family, best for your career. And maybe that's best is going to be, you know what, you should probably transition out of this career. That's what I just did, because it was just the child abuse, or child crimes in general, and the death scenes were just getting too heavy for me. And that's okay. And my medical team, as I got to that spot where I realized I needed to make a change, they supported me in that. But they weren't trying to represent my city. They weren't trying to represent workers' comp. They were just worried about me healing. And if that meant me going back to work, they supported me. And if that meant me retiring, they supported me. But I hope all first responders will listen to that piece. And we're going to give you more tools before Danny and I are done here. But get a lawyer in case you're getting sued. Get a doctor that their only job in the world is to take care of your body, and get a mental health professional that you talk with.
Yeah, that's spot on. I see my personal physician 4 times a year, quarterly.
I love it. That's even better.
And for blood work and just in getting checked out.
Yes.
And something that's kind of funny is when I learned about lawyers and stuff, I hated them. And because when you're on the stand, the defense attorney's just crawling all up inside of you. And I hated them, but I go, there's a handful of lawyers that are really good defense attorneys that really got my ire, that after talking to them, I go, if I ever get in trouble, I'm calling you.
Don't hate the player, hate the game. Here's the deal.
Exactly.
The deal. Great lawyers out there, they're not going to attack your character unless you give them a reason to attack it. They're going to try to attack your work. They're going to try to spotlight how your work somehow didn't follow established case law or statutory law. Uh, Other than that, like I did the exact same thing, Danny. Some of the lawyers that I would hire if I was getting sued are the ones that I hate. I hate being on the opposite side of a case with because they're good. They are good, and they are going to try to create reasonable doubt if I didn't do my job right. And I've also seen some of those same lawyers where we had an airtight case walk in and they didn't attack our work. They just called their defendant by the first name and the fact that they were a military veteran over and over and over and over again, trying to connect with the hearts of the jury. Yeah, my client, not even my client, Timmy, an Army veteran, did this crime, and this wasn't right. Timmy, Timmy, over and over and over again, right? And I watched him do it, and I was like, "You're good, you're good. You know that this case is solid, but you're trying to connect to with the hearts of the jury, and it worked." And you know what? He was a military veteran, and he'd served his country, and I think he was battling from PTSD. So in the end, the way the case worked out, I thought was actually just based on the totality of it. So,
right. And when you get into back, I want to get into suicide
please.
for a second. Is November 6th, 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, was a very, very bad day.
Yes, it was.
In a 24-hour period, 4 members of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department died by suicide. It was 1 commander, 2 deputies, and a custody assistant or jailer. All died by suicide. And that made 9 suicide deaths from one agency this year. And what's sad about that is that's 10% of all the death by suicide of law enforcement this year. And you have to think of what's going on in the organization. When you get into it, I think a lot of organizations, especially during these days, they're failing their officers by not giving them the support they need, by forcing them to work more hours in a week than there are. There's guys that are working 96 hours of overtime a month. And in the agency that I worked for, they have up to that to upwards of 120 hours a month of overtime. And that just leads into sleep deprivation and sleep deprivation. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, he's well known for a lot of the books he writes. He's a PTSI and sleep expert. And he claims, and I believe it, is that the number one cause of suicide, bad decisions, and the use of force are lack of sleep or sleep deprivation.
100%. He actually came on the show here, episode 26, and shared a lot of those facts. And I actually had the conversation within the last year with one of my commanders. We'd had 2 guys out on a SWAT mission all night, and they'd gotten 1 hour of sleep. And the watch commander for the day was just an officer in charge. It wasn't one of our actual 3-striper sergeants. And he reports during our morning briefing, hey, these guys came in, got back from their SWAT mission at 4, and they reported here at 5:30. And so I'm doing the math, and I'm like, I wouldn't have even gone to sleep. And at most I got 45 minutes, and then it hurt when I got up. So we get done with our briefing and we walk out, and I say to my commander, I said, hey boss, we need to send those guys home. And he goes, the officer in charge asked them and they said they were good. And I'm like, nope, we need to send them home. And he goes, why? I'm like, because they're not fit to work. He goes, when are we going to let guys make adult decisions? And I said, when medical science tells us that they are equivalent to a DUI. And this guy, he is a good boss, and he has a background in force science. And so when I said it that way, when I gave him the medical piece, right, the thing you can't refute that Dave Grossman talks about, Matthew Walker talks about in his book, Why We Sleep, just data saying that you are equivalent to DUI. We can't put guns on people's hips or IVs, needles in EMS hands when they are deprived of their sleep and expect them to perform. We just can't keep doing that to our people.
Yeah, and they're doing it over and over, and because of staffing issues, and a lot of departments, they overcommit themselves, and that even creates more staffing issues. I go back to the Los Angeles riots in 92. We were working 21, 22-hour days for a week. And it's the same thing. We'd get back to the station, you take a nap, and then you're back, you putting on a clean uniform and going back. And those are some long days. And then in about 2009, there was a major forest fire that burnt down most of the Angeles National Forest. And we're talking an area the size of Los Angeles County. And on that fire, I was working, I'd do a 22-hour day, then a 12-hour day, then a 22-hour day, then a 12-hour day. And by the end of the week, you're a walking zombie. I'd come home and my wife goes, "What's the matter with you?" You know, I finally get a day off because all of our days off were canceled. I finally get a day off and all you do is sleep, and you never catch up on that sleep.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. And you get that coupled with you're not being home with your family now. You're out being forced to do stuff that's causing family issues. You're probably drinking a little bit to get down out of that hypervigilant cycle, which is going to cause issues.
Which is
And
robbing you of more sleep now.
yeah, exactly. And at the end, all you're doing is just you're creating more stress on your body. You're creating stress on your heart. I'm writing a blog right now, so it'll be out hopefully in the next couple of days of cardiovascular health, and the numbers are alarming that your average police officer doesn't live very long. The average police officer, his heart attack rate, I think Dr. John Scheinberg, he estimated the average police officer has a heart attack at 47 years old, where the average non-police officer is 65. In the fire service, heart attacks outweigh any other type of line of duty death. And that's just because we're not taking care of, we're not sleeping, we're not taking care of ourselves. Guys are drinking, guys are stressed out, burned out. They don't know how to do anything other than just go to work, and they're walking zombies. And nobody sees it. And when you're working for an agency and they're telling you, well, you got to go to the riots, or you got to go to, and sure, it's fun, it's good, and the money was good, but you also have to have a boss that's going to sit there and say, no, you take the day off. You got to sit down and relax. And when I was a sergeant, that's what I would do. Is I'd have guys. I worked in a unit that had unlimited overtime, and I'd set my guys down and go, no, you're not working overtime tonight. You're going to go home and get some rest and get some sleep.
Yes.
If you don't have a boss that's going to do that, then they're just failing you, and the organization is failing you.
Well, unfortunately, this hasn't been our culture. My commander that I spoke with, him saying, when are we going to make adult decisions, at least for the places that I've policed in 3 different jurisdictions? That was the culture. We let them make adult decisions. Like if they pop into work and be like, yeah, I didn't get any sleep, I slept 2 hours. Like we're like, oh, okay, drink some coffee. And I think we need to, as a culture, we really need to look hard at this, because if medical science is telling us that people are not going to operate efficiently, and we continue to put them on the street, eventually cities and counties are going to get sued, and you're going to get sued so hard, and there's going to be so many zeros on the end. Eventually legislation will force it, but let's be leaders. Let's step up right now. But here's the deal, Danny, when you went through the police academy, did they train you how to search a building?
Yes.
Did they train you how to put handcuffs on someone?
Definitely.
So those are critical skills in our job. They didn't just give you a pair of handcuffs and say, hey, in your own time, this is a good idea. They didn't give you a gun and a flashlight and say, hey, there's buildings and we're going to show you something on the screen. Okay, now go out and just, you need to work that into your personal life. No, those were critical skills that they trained me on as well when I went through the Washington State Police Academy. However, we're still treating officer wellness. We're still treating the engine of our car, our brains, as if it's just a personal responsibility. Now, there is a personal responsibility. In June, when I had some violent images flowing through my brain, I had the personal responsibility of making a phone call and asking for help, right? I had that personal responsibility. And I went to an inpatient facility recovery center that really helped me. However, as an organization, we have to look at this differently. And I don't have the magic fix for it. I don't know exactly what that looks like, other than from hire until retire, and hopefully through retirement, we need to start looking at how can we take care of the engines? How can we take care of the brain and our most valuable resource, our people?
That's correct. The part of the culture, and it's just something that goes way back. It's the way it's always been done, so that's the way we're going to do it. And
Yeah.
that's the culture of law. That's the culture of government. Period. Is
Yeah.
that this is the way we've always done it? We're not going to change, and that's just it. There's no way, no talking about it. And we have to change the culture. We have to change the stigma. And the stigma, once we can stop the stigma, then the culture will slowly change. And the stigma is that first responders feel like if they say they have a mental illness, if they try to go to get help for post-traumatic stress, if they do anything, people are going to look down on them. They're going to, I don't want to work with you because you're a nut. I don't want to do this with you because of X, Y, and Z. And that's the stigma. And so guys aren't getting help because they don't want to be considered a liability to the team, when actually they're not a liability. They would be a great asset to the team after they get help. And that's something that, and I think agencies in general, and the not so much the lower ranking people in the agency, but the higher the leaders of the agencies, they're just kicking the can down the road. And you're right, there's going to be a lot of zeros on the end of that lesson.
Yeah. Hey, Danny, you mentioned something really impactful, and we've talked on a lot of topics now. The fact that you lost 4 of your prior coworkers from Los Angeles County. I'm sorry, brother. That's heavy.
That hurt, and I can talk about it. I get a little emotional like I am right now, but
yeah,
that hurt. And when you lose 9 in 1 year, it's a couple of months ago, the daughter of a retired chief, and on the sheriff's department, the division chief is like 3 steps below the sheriff. She was a deputy. She died by suicide. And right after that, I had already written an article called Law Enforcement Suicide. I wrote an article, and it was published in the magazine Star and Shield, which is the official publication of the Sergeants and Lieutenants Union on Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. And it was also published in Law Enforcement Today magazine. And it talks exactly what we're talking about now, why guys aren't getting help. And it's on November 7th, the chatter on Facebook through the law enforcement group size, it's too bad this happened. It's too bad that, we're really sorry that these guys died by suicide. A couple of days ago, there was just on a Facebook page for active and retired Los Angeles County deputy sheriffs, there was a deputy who was complaining about exactly what we're talking about, being forced to work overtime, being called in on their days off, being called in on their days off to work, just and going back to that stressed out, burned out atmosphere. And some of the retired guys, they're writing, and actually some of the active guys too, is quit complaining, suck it up, buttercup. And I'm just like, you know what, dude, 2 weeks ago, you were crying because 4 of our buddies died. And now you're telling someone to suck it up. You're not the problem solver. You're part of the problem, not the solution. And that is still something that we have to get changed, is be part of the solution, not the problem. And it's like, for me, it stripped away 5 years of work with these guys in this group. Now I'm back in the process of rebuilding it, and I'm kind of spamming them on different issues right now. I put out that article on law enforcement suicide several more times, and I'll send you the link on my Facebook page, or on my website for that particular article. And it just constantly got to build them back up and get them in the right mindset, because something's going to happen and they're just going to say, suck it up, buttercup, again. And that's the attitude. And hopefully we can get past that. I don't know.
Well, I think we can get past it, but it's going to take leaders all throughout our organization with a constant message. You don't change culture overnight. You don't change culture with a 1 hour PowerPoint or with a new book. You change culture by us constantly talking about this
That's right.
over and over and over again. And some people are like, man, I'm just tired about talking about this. Okay, maybe we don't talk about it in the same way. We don't have to constantly talk about statistics every time. Statistics are powerful. That gets the cognitive brain in some of us, right? There's some of our personalities that just grab a hold of that. Other people are more relational, and them hearing the individual story and the impact that it had on them is going to get them, get them in. Sometimes we just need to sit there and talk about the things we can do to heal our brains and to manage the stress on a day-to-day basis, but we have to keep the conversation going. I think it should be in some way at every briefing, every roll call, every training that we do as agencies, at our annual awards banquet, at our family picnics, at all of these events, there needs to be some layer of, we care about you. These are the things that we want to remind you, or we're going to coach you on doing to keep yourselves healthy. But if we aren't repetitive with it, it's not going to stick. Our cultures are going to stay toxic, and they're going to stay the same as they have for my dad's generation and for my grandpa's generation.
Yeah. For us, we would have quarterly briefings on the use of force, quarterly briefings on shoot, don't shoot tactics, quarterly briefings and tests and on pursuit policies. And it was always these policies that were, no one ever in 31 years never talked about psychological services or mental health or just officer well-being in general. It was never talked about. And it's going to take pushing that buttons. And actually the only place it was probably ever talked about was, there's a group in Los Angeles that are just, it's a AA group of just retired, or not retired, but of just cops and firefighters. And that's about the only time you'd ever hear anybody talking about officer wellness. And these are a bunch of guys that are at least taking care of the problem of officer wellness, going through AA. Some of them were probably forced and some of them were volunteer. But
yeah,
it's, when it comes to the alcohol issues, what's amazing is that about 30% of all suicides are alcohol related. And when you get into alcohol within law enforcement, alcohol use and abuse is deeply ingrained. The only show I can ever think of that never talked about alcohol or have alcohol was Adam 12. Every other movie, every other thing, the cops are sitting in a bar after a big case, or you got the lonely cops sitting in a bar crying over his sorrows and everything. And that it's deeply ingrained, and then law enforcement didn't help itself for years. And this part of the culture has changed. It's probably a good thing. Is back in the day, you'd be an off-duty cop and you'd be drunk and you'd get stopped and you'd be taken care of. They'd either give you a ride home or let you go or tell you to go get a cup of coffee. Nowadays, that changed finally, and guys are starting to be held accountable for what they're actually doing when they're off duty and drinking. So
in Washington State, and I guess I can't speak for every jurisdiction, I've worked in Snohomish County and Benton, Franklin County, and if I got stopped for a DUI, bracelets are going on me. I already know that, and I've seen it play out for other officers. So, and I think it should. Here's the deal: DUI is a dangerous choice that kills people every year. And if it's my job to go out and stop that from happening, then if I'm going to choose to do it, I need to be held accountable as well. Hey, Danny, I want to get into some of the solutions that you know about. But before we do that, can you talk about your book, Broken?
I wrote a book called Broken. It's BRO semicolon KEN. The semicolon represents a pause. And for a writer, instead of using a pause or using a period, they'll put a semicolon in to kind of break up the sentence. But in the mental health world, a semicolon means a pause, which means you're going to stop thinking about suicidal ideations or your problems and stuff like that, and you're going to move forward in a different way. And a friend of mine, he has a podcast, and his theme is you always, when you're stuck in a rut, you always have to move forward. You can, if you stay stuck in your rut and stay in one spot, you're going to die. Maybe not a physical death, but a mental death. And his thing is always continue to move forward. So you're doing something, and that's the theme of the book. Kind of, it starts out with some scary statistics, like I gave here, but it talks about how your brain works, and it's how we process things. And there we have your amygdala, which is a small almond-sized gland in your brain, and that's basically the control center. And your pituitary gland, that's about a pea size. So things that are very small in your brain, they're doing all kinds of weird stuff to you. And the memories, they don't go away. Basically everything, a lot of people will think that we see things and it's like a video. Actually, it's not. It's individual stills. Our brain just puts it all together. And like you can close one eye and still see what's going on kind of over in this way, because your brain is putting it all together. And it's a weird concept, but that's how it works. And when you get into these high stress situations, and the best way to put it is, and it's an example I wrote in the book, is you're a police officer. You get a call of a suspicious person at a convenience store. So you're starting to get excited about it. And then as the call comes in, it's still a routine call. As the call gets updated to the person may have a gun and it's stuck in his waistband. And so you're starting to amp up a little bit more. Your amygdala and your pituitary gland, they come alive. Now you're pumping a little bit of adrenaline. Your heartbeat goes up a little bit. Your blood pressure slightly raises. You get a little tense in your muscles, and you start to see a little bit better because your eyes are becoming dilated. You get to the scene and you see your guy there, and sure enough, he's got a gun stuck in his waistband. And you go through all the motions, and you go right into full stress mode in just milliseconds. You go from a little stressed to highly stressed. You draw on your weapon, and all of this is happening in under a second. Then you realize the guy, he complies. He goes off to jail, and you sit there for the next half an hour trying to calm back down. And that's what it takes. Most people, it takes them about 10 minutes. But for first responders, when they get to those emergency situations, it lasts a lot longer. And now you amp that up. It doesn't matter if you're working for a police department of 5 people in a small town, or you're working in a major police department. Your next call is going to be probably something of an emergent call or a high priority call, and you're going to be amped up again. And you do this several times a day, your body never recovers from it. And that goes into what's called the hypervigilant cycle. And there's a retired Pima County deputy sheriff, his last name is Gil Martin. He wrote a book about the hypervigilant cycle, and he talks about how as you're going to work, your body's slowly getting kind of built up, looking forward to getting on the job and taking bad guys to jail and driving fast and all those fun things that we do. And you get to work and you're at an emotional high, you have a physical high, you're amped up, you're funny. I mean, life is great. Then you get off work and you go home or you go to a bar and you never come back down. And finally, probably several 8-10 hours after everything's done with, you calm back down. And now you're just a couch potato because you're burned out. You cannot emotionally and physically do anything else. And that cycle, a couple hours after that, you get some sleep, you go back to work, that cycle starts up again. So you're constantly going up and down. And Gil Martin calls it the emotional roller coaster. And that's what it is. And you just going up and down. And then you couple that with the stresses of the job. It's a lot of people think it's fun driving fast, but it's actually kind of stressful when you're busting through an intersection on a major intersection on a red light, and cars are coming at you 60 miles an hour, and you're clearing the intersection lane by lane, and that's stressful. Driving fast, driving police cars, and driving fire trucks is stressful. The other stresses of the job, just constant having to use force, having to see force used, that's stressful. And you get these stressful incidents and you never get down from that. And your pituitary gland and your amygdala are constantly pumping you full of adrenaline. And then you get melatonin to take away the effects of the adrenaline. And that's what your body's doing. And your body just short circuits, your brain short circuits. Yeah. And we have, I think they said 20,000 miles of nerves cycle going through our system. I mean, our bodies are basically one big electrical system anyway.
Yeah.
And
for the listeners, if you haven't read Dr. Kevin Gilmartin's book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, I'm telling you, as firefighters, as dispatchers, EMS, military, even though it says for law enforcement, read the book. It's a very small book. It's thin. So if you're not a fast reader like me, you can get through it in a month, probably in a day if you were really committed. But as a third generation cop, I'm telling you, I saw this play out in my dad. He is and he was a good dad, but he would come home and he would sit in his magic Barca lounger and he would check out with his eyes open, watching TV. And I could not get the man's attention unless I screamed his first name. So I'm telling you, Dr. Gilmartin will help your family, the first responder family, the military family, understand, hey, not a bad dad, not a bad mom. This is a biological thing that's happening inside of them. And there's things you can do to sit there and mitigate it. Danny, what are some of the tools? We can't list all of them because there are a lot of great tools out there for the first responder. But what are some of the great tools that you have seen
the ones that I'm kind of fond of is Copline, and that is a 24/7 phone or suicide hotline for law enforcement and their families. And it is staffed by volunteer retired police officers and deputy sheriffs. I know several people that are part of the program, and when I listen to their stories, they're powerful and they are able to help and able to lead you in the right directions. There's an organization called Reboot Recovery. They're a faith-based organization, and they started with the military and the PTSD issues with the military, and they've expanded into the first responder arena, which is great. And they have first responder conferences throughout the United States. They're put on by, you could put one on in your hometown, and I could put one on in my hometown, and these officers will sign up and come to it. And it's usually about I think a 12 or 13-week program once a week where you get down and they have a certain program that they go through. And it works. They've had great success with that. And there's another organization called Mighty Oaks Warrior Programs. Mighty Oaks, one of the co-founders is a friend of mine. And their program is a week-long program. They have, I think, 6 different locations throughout the United States where you go for a week. Everything's paid for, transportation, lodging, everything's paid for. You go for a week and you go through their programs. And they're also for military and first responders. And one of the things that is interesting is we have in the first responder arena a lot of people who are either active duty or former military. So we have guys that are coming back from the deployment, and a lot of agencies don't have the means to help them through their deployment. And what I want to know now is how many of our 162 suicides from last year of law enforcement, how many of those are veterans? How many of those were deployed? How many of those are both a part of the first responder issues and the military issues? And that's, I don't think we'll ever find those stats because they're, law enforcement suicide or first responder suicide period is not reported 100%. And when I say these 162 from last year, the 89 this year, those are just reported. Those, we don't hear about all of them.
Yeah. So, and even, I mean, we wouldn't be hearing about even that many if it wasn't for First Help doing the work they're doing to gather the data Karen Solomon's doing great work there, and
Yeah.
her team in telling the story and honoring. Here's the thing: it's not a but here. It's not, yeah, this person was a first responder and did great work, but they committed suicide. It's, this person was a first responder and did great work, and they eventually were overwhelmed. And the reason I like to point that out is using the word but, and taking away from the remarkable work that some of our brothers and sisters have done, uh, is adding to the shame. It's adding to the silence. It's adding to the stigma. And so the more we talk about it and honor the memory of our brothers and sisters that aren't with us anymore, including the ones that committed suicide, I think is a big piece in us changing our frame of mind on this.
Yeah, Karen Stone, she started with Blue Help, and that's morphed into First Help, which is just, she's doing first responders, firefighters, dispatchers, telecommunicators. I mean, the first person that hears of something bad is the 911 dispatcher, the person that picks up that 911 phone.
Yeah.
And, when I was injured a couple of times, I'd have to work the front desk, and so I would be that person that was answering the 911 calls. Most of the time, it's the civilian communication officers, but officers will work that on occasion, and that's tough. That's really tough when you're hearing screaming in the phone, or when you're trying to explain someone how to do CPR over the phone. At the same time, you're typing in the call of service. A lot of people, I get the kick out of this. You'll watch some of these TV shows like Dateline or First 48, and in the call, you'll hear the 911 call taker taking the call and asking them a gazillion questions. And the person on the other end is, why are you asking me all these questions? Just get someone here. Well, that person on the other side of the phone, the person calling, doesn't know that a car's already been dispatched, probably two cars, that the fire department's already on the way. The dispatcher, these people can multitask like I've never seen before.
Like nobody's business. And actually, the last episode we had on the podcast was Deborah Green, a retired police dispatcher, retired 911 dispatcher,
Right.
From the El Dorado area in California. So yeah, they are part of our family, and they're experiencing this just like the first responders are. Hey, Danny, what are ways that people can stay connected to you if they don't know you yet? How can they find your book? How can they find the blogs that you're pushing out?
Yeah, I have a website. It's called bulletprooffirstresponder.com. It's all one word. And if you want to contact me, my email address is Danny, D-A-N-N-Y, at bulletprooffirstresponder.com. And you can get my book. I have it on Amazon. And all you have to do is type in Broken, or it's easier if you just type in my name in the search bar for Amazon. Just Danny Coon, and Broken will pop up, and you'll be able to see it. And also occasionally I post for law enforcement. I post on several different law enforcement Facebook pages. So I always post my blogs on all of those pages, or a bunch of pages. And some of the ones are Blue Lives Matter, worldwide, the law enforcement network on LinkedIn. So I trying to build a really good social media network, and I'm doing pretty good at that. So my blogs are always posted on that. And if you go to my website, you'll be able to sign up to get my blogs when I post them. So it's all of those are some good ways.
I love it. Well, for the listeners, look down in the show notes. There'll be links to each one of those things that Danny mentioned. Danny, time is my greatest commodity. I can't make more of this stuff, and you've given me an awful lot of yours. Thank you, brother.
Chris, I want to thank you very much too, brother. You have a great day.
You as well. Wow, folks, I know I say this all the time, and I hope the frequency doesn't take away from the sincerity of it, but I am blown away by this privilege to sit down with remarkable people and to listen to their story, to listen to their heart and the work that they're doing to support first responders and military members around the country and around the world. Folks, Jaimie and I want to hear from you. How are we doing here on the podcast? There's a few different ways for you to communicate back to us. First and foremost, please follow us on whatever podcast platform you're consuming this on. That will cause the next episode to come up. You can also rate and review us. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, there are 5 stars waiting on our main page, and we would really appreciate a 5-star rating if we've earned 5 stars, folks. If we haven't earned 5 stars, keep your stars. Instead, shoot me an email at chris@gravityct.com. Let us know how to make it better, future Marriage Monday topics, or guests for me to interview. Folks, we only get to live this life once. Let's go out and take care of the people in our tribe. Take care of each other. God bless.